Welcome everybody to Fugitive Words. Today we've got the pleasure of having with us Tommasso Sbriccoli, who's a social anthropologist who teaches at the University of Vienna. Tommaso has conducted extensive ethnographic research in northern India since 2003. He has focused on the interaction of customary law and state justice and law there. He has worked on forms of rural politics, on local idioms and practices of relatedness, and on social change. He has also worked on a number of international projects focusing on Indian villages, infrastructure, microcredit, and debt, as well as in law. He's conducted most of his research in the states of Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, and he works in Hindi, Marwari, and Malvi. Tommaso has written on traditional councils on crime and gifts, on communalism in Madhya Pradesh, and has recently published on the life and legend of a bandit in a Malwa village. Tommaso also works on migration and asylum seeking and on intercultural theory and translation. He is editor of Shifting Borders, European Perspectives on Creolization, and that's come out with Cambridge Scholars Publishing in 2012. Welcome, Tommaso. Pleasure.
Thank you. Very happy to be here, and very much look forward then to the development of the project. And I must start with two apologies, so two excusaciones non petite. One is about my English. The first concern my English. After 1 year and a half of lockdown, even my Italian has worsened, so I can only imagine what happened to my English. So hopefully you will be able to understand what I will say. Otherwise, just let me know. The second is about my contribution. It's more, I won't present a coherent argument, but rather I will present some notes on my research, the research I carried out in the last 15 years in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, and the topics that reflect some of my interest and which I would like to investigate during the research for this project. So the areas where I collected the information here reported are the Godwar region in Rajasthan, in the Pali district, so Jodhpur, in the area of Jodhpur, and the districts of Devas and Ratlam in the region of Malwa in Madhya Pradesh. When talking about Godwar, so most information refers to the Raika community, traditionally sheep and camel breeders, with whom I carried out the research for my PhD. I would like to start with an image, a man seated on a mattress or a blanket, which is quite a common one in the political imagination in India. This is a potent figure of authority in the areas of Rajasthan where I did research, but also more broadly in India's past and present. In the Godwar area, in the Pali district, when one or more men with authority sit on a dari or a bhakal, which are carpets. I apologize also because I don't have slides, so if you need, I will spell some of the terms I will report. So this dari and bhakal, they are carpets, and when men of authority sit on them, the object changes its name. It becomes a jajam. This signals the reconfiguration of the space into a political and partly religious one, where the decisions can be properly made and must be complied with. In my research with the Panchayat of the Raika community in Rajasthan, I've been told that when this occurs, that is when Panch sits on a blanket, Panch Parmeshwar, Jajam Devi. So Panch become gods and the Jajam becomes a goddess, a Devi. This clearly alludes to the image of the Linga Yoni, the unity of the feminine and the masculine divine authority. One would say that power in this context can only be authorized by a religious principle, though in the story I collected on the origin of the traditional Raika Panchayat, the usual fight between Parvati and Shiva is solved by the intervention of other three characters, Nandi, Narad Muni, and the first Raika, Sambar, making it 5 people, the right number for decision making, and also explaining the etymology of the word Panchayat. And these persons discuss together the issue and eventually find a solution in a pretty secular way, we could say. People with authority and who use it properly in order to find the better decision and settle a dispute are considered as doing the work of God, or even like godlike beings. While gods, similarly to humans, may discuss among them in order to settle a case without imposing a solution by using their sovereign power. Two models appear to be at work here, which are neither conflicting nor alternative though, and seem to point to different but complementary ways of authorization. The first is a capacity to act, or even a right to decide, inscribed in the very role one occupies. A model of authorization that attributes to person in specific positions of power, a power that partly transcends them. Something usually referred to locally with the terms adhikar or jimedar, right and responsibility, which in the model of patronage typical of South Asia, as Anastasia has quite clearly demonstrated, are parts of the same process. So we cannot separate right or privilege from responsibility toward those who are below us. But also the term sarkar is used to describe this kind of authority. In pragmatic terms, this kind of authority is attributed or acknowledged to others by addressing them with terms like Maharaj, Raja, Mabap, Malik, even Bhagwan. This figure of traditional authority and justice resonates with the local politician holding hearings or darbars for his followers and clients in his house or office, dispensing justice or promises of it, at least while sitting on a mattress or a chair. And it resonates also with processes of deification of politicians. The other model points to an authority which is shared. It is not embodied, so to say, by those to whom decisional roles are attributed, but it is produced by adhering to specific discursive rules, procedural norms, traditional uses. In the second model, panchayat is not seen as the rule of panchs, understood as almost divine figures in their managing of community issues, but as a political body whose authority relies on the strength of number and the capacity to reach consensus. Here, panchs are understood as those who own specific qualities and make them available to the assembly. Panchs are batovalo, those who are good at speaking, and those who can grasp the core of a matter. According to some informants, that who speaks well in a panchayat, he is a panch. A panch is a person who knows the four style of discourse, charbat jarnevalo, although unfortunately I never came to know what these four styles are, so I tried hard to discover what these styles are, but nobody, probably it's just a way of saying that four style exists. They must be intelligent, tanko, rather than strong, takat, and must be able to mediate between different positions. A panch must have gad, rather than takat, and gad is a peculiar form of authority which is obtained by gaining the respect of others, ijat, rather than through mere demonstrations of power. Ijat or gad, dunia detiye, log detiye. Honor and gad are given by the word, by the people, as one informant told me. These are not ascribed qualities, possessive values, as Anastasia would call them, but relational ones. A panch must be able to place a fact within a precise normative framework, and in order to do this, he must know the history, itias of the community, and have personal experience of what happened before. This is why he needs to have a good memory, yad, and also to have participated frequently in meetings since he was young. He must have a passion, a shok, with panchayat. Furthermore, panch must say the truth, such bolna, and be true. Sahi hadmi ona chahiye. An old panch once told me the 5 qualities, gunas, a panch must have. So the first is never get angry when you have to take a decision. Gussa nahi hona chahiye panchayat mein. The second is never consider someone as your enemy when you take a decision. The third is always speak the truth or truly, sahi bolna. The fourth is always take care of people when you take a decision. Do not think only to punish, hajadena, but also to their overall condition. Unka halat kya hai? When you discuss a case, you must have a light inside you, and this is the last quality. So this light is called ujalu, which illuminates your soul, your atman, and make things appear clearly. Most of these qualities are considered as fundamental also to the modern politician, whose credibility lies indeed in his ability to speak, his rhetorical qualities, his capacity to remember people's or client names, their problems, their connections, and the history of the places he visits in order to gather consensus and vote. This is, for anyone who has followed a politician during an electoral campaign, is impressive, the amount of information they remember about the people of the constituency, the name, the relation. Then of course they have also others who suggest and prepare them before they go to the campaign, village to village, but it's still is very impressive how much the amount of knowledge they have about people. And a politician must have a passion for his or her work and must develop technical skills, so memory, capacity of recognizing people, and so on. The tension between these two models of traditional political authority is not as strong as it could appear. On one side we have what we could gloss as power, understood as a sovereignty, a right to command, which is ascribed with, which one finds in. On the other side, we have power understood as authority, the recognition of one's ability and the attitude to decide for others. But both are evaluated not in normative terms, but rather in their performative capacity. In this sense, both are assessed according to their efficacy. In Italian, we have the word potenza, probably could be translated as with potency in English, I'm not sure. Potenza, which is neither power nor authority, but it's the effective capacity of enacting one's power or authority. It's a word extremely important also in Machiavelli's work, for example. So the capacity to transform expectation into effective action, whatever the source of authority is. And this is what is mostly looked at. In both cases, authority seem to function as Bruce Lincoln's showed for the Latin word auctoritas, from the verb audio, as a form of increase, something that, if properly enacted, brings to the welfare of all. Punch acciocare vela povede. If punch do well, generations will grow, will flourish. My connection is not stable. Can you hear me properly? Yeah. Okay. So efficacy, potenza, the actual capacity to affect the world must be authorized, acknowledged, in order for them to produce benefits. But this pragmatics of authority appears to produce a peculiar effect, which projects a specific political performative power on apparently trivial terms. Let's take the very usual word betana, to seat someone, to have someone sit. To have someone sit at one's place, or even in a public space, but on your invitation. And also this shows the audio position between private and public space is not so pertinent in this context, means acknowledging to the person an authority in relation to one's need. And in this sense, authority is always situational, and creates a localized political time space where decision binding for the two parts, but affecting the social field at large, can be taken. So Beti Maharaj, Thoda Sabat Karnier, please sit, I have to talk to you about a small matter, or afterward. Mene unko betaya or is mamle me batki. I had him sit and talk to him about this matter. These are sentences we try to produce or assert to have produced a political space where the person object of betana is attributed a form of authority. In this sense, I will see the ethnographic areas where I carried out research as place where proper political spaces, that is spaces where binding political decision can be properly taken, and not just spaces when political talk can be made. So these spaces proliferate, generated by performative speech acts that do mostly three things. First, they delimitate a space and a time and cut it out from normal daily activity, create a sort of ritual space. They signal the attribution of authority to a specific subject or subjects, and thus create or acknowledge an asymmetry of power. And in pragmatic terms, is almost the same if they create or they acknowledge this authority, because in pragmatic terms, we just see that they produce an asymmetry, and if this asymmetry was there beforehand or not is secondary. And third, they recognize just the binding character of what will be decided if something will be decided in that place. So the importance of these informal political space-times is evident for anyone who has been carrying out ethnographic research in North India, as they are placed not in opposition, but on a continuum with more formal ones. So the creation of this localized political time space is not something completely different than from more formal ones. They are on a continuum, and the conversation and decision taken in one of those are then effective, or should be at least considered as effective also in other fora. And also here, the terminology, the differentiation between formal and informal is maybe not getting to the point for what concerns the politics in South Asia. And it is not unusual for people in need to activate as many of these political events as possible, disseminating, so to say, authority among many different subjects. And some of these subjects sometimes will even not be expecting that to have such role attributed. So in many situations, I found people were attributed such kind of authority in relation to small matters by others, and they were a little bit disappointed that, of course, they try to comply with the role that were attributed, but they felt like, oh, I'm not sure whether I'm the right person to satisfy this request. But of course, they were caught in these processes of authorization. This is also something that Vitebsky talked about is in his contribution, the fact that this process of authorization multiplies in some respects, and with the arrival of the modern democracy. And so in my work with the Raika Jati Panchayat, when I asked about the proper places where Panchayat could be held, I was often told that Panch Beto, Panchayat Ave, where a Panch sits, there a Panchayat occurs. Of course, a Panch is always invited to sit by someone for a specific reason, and we could even say that he's produced as a Panch by the very act of being invited to sit. But the main point that I want to do here is that there are no set places and times for a Panchayat to occur. Every space and time is potentially political in this sense. Talib Karna and Art Jorna, to beg someone by folding one's on hand, are similar pragmatic. Sorry, I lost the point. Are similar pragmatic instances of the way in which one can attempt to politicize a situation. And with politicization here, I mean the production of an event as significant in terms of its potential effects on the restructuring of social reality and relations. Even chai pilana, to offer someone a tea, could be seen as a potentially political term of action when it alludes to the production of such space-times. Of course, I'm not suggesting to insert in the vernacular lexicography of India's political life also the locution chai pilana, although maybe betana could instead be inserted, as we shall see in a moment. But what I'm trying to do is to reason on the ways in which language can signal the presence or opening of a politically significant event, within which to ethnographically investigate the jargon, the proxemic, the discursive content, and so on. If we go back to the verb betana, it is widely known that this term is used to describe the action of sitting one malevolent spirit, usually identified with an ancestor or a relative on an altar. By this action, the spirit, to whom a particular efficacy was recognized, efficacy embodying often, but efficacy nonetheless, is transmuted in a hopefully benign figure whose authority, his or her capacity to act, is explicitly acknowledged and respected. To seat someone means to authorize him or her to acknowledge and consequently rely on his or her efficacy. The structure of authorization is clearly linked to that of patronage, so well described by Anastasia, and it is explicitly political, although this has not often been recognized as such. To authorize means also to give respect or to honor people, ijat karna, so doing the reputation of others, making them accountable, jimedar, trusting their honesty, imandari. And as Anastasia rightly pointed out in her book, it is pragmatic, contextual. It does not exist if not enacted in specific situations, with specific person acting in specific roles. And whatever the source of authority of a punch is, it can be easily withdrawn. I collected plenty of linguistic expressions devaluing the positions of specific punch or punch in general. Vocavaria loge, they are people who just eat. Wo punch bole fir kai fir jai. That punch comes, talks a lot, then eat and then goes. And then punch as corrupted people will take decision in favor of the richer side of a dispute, and many more instances of the evaluation of punch. Authority, thus, is never a possessive value in this context and must be continuously reaffirmed through effective action. The structure and vocabulary of traditional justice and authority seems to be still extremely significant for the local comprehension of and action in contemporary political dynamics, and the way in which politicians' reputation is built and maintained partly corresponds to this, let's call it, traditional model. One word, though, that has not moved from the traditional vocabulary to the contemporary one is olba, O-L-B-A, whose etymology I could not find, unfortunately. Olba is a juridical and moral category attributed to those who broke the Dharma and were thus excluded from all or just some forms of lenden or social interaction with members of their community. It is similar to the concept of Eli described by Aiden for the Nandivala of Maharashtra, although it differs from it in one point at least, which is that it does not only identify the spiritual impurity of the responsible of actions against the code of conduct and norms of the community, something for which one then has to expiate, but it also carries in itself a meaning of punishment. This word was fundamental in the framework of traditional justice I encountered in Rajasthan, but it has, for what I found, no use in political contemporary discourse. Why some words do not transitate from one level to the other is, I believe, a very interesting and important aspect to investigate. I feel strictly related, also in lexical term, to that of traditional justice is the field of possession and of spiritual healing. Mediums of local deities are other figures sitting on Gaddis thrones, by literary cushion or mattress. They heal, but they also, as panchis and panchayas, dispense justice. As Harry Moore wrote in a work on Rajasthani healing practices and traditional legal fora, getting sick is a mode of seeking justice. In Godwar, medium are called bopas, while there are pandas in Malwa and Bhagat, for example, in southern Rajasthan. In both places, both in Rajasthan and in Malwa, they are approached by people not only to be healed, mostly in cases that involve otherworldly beings, but also to ask advice for problems related to other aspects of the Jatru's life. The Jatru is a pilgrim, but more generally are those who go to Bopas to ask for something. And it's interesting that often I've been heard people going to the local politician to ask for favors as Jatru. They are defined Jatru as well. So also in this case, the terminology is either borrowed or just considered as the same people doing the same function, and so needing the same word to be described. The authority of the Bopa is given by his or her being possessed by the god or goddess, and the terminology used in this context is strictly related to the one of power, although in this case, the word Shakti, which is often used to describe the power of Bopa, is a religious one and has moved from the religious field to also the political one. The Bopa is addressed as Maharaj, and in order to heal his patients, he often hits them on the back with a kotwal, which is long pincers. A kotwal, beside referring to this tool, also means sentinel. So the Hindi word would be chokidar. And it is considered the servant of the Bopa. And so also the man actually assisting the Bopa is called kotwal. So we have kotwal as the tool, kotwal as the person helping the Bopa, and both, and kotwal means in general chokidar, guard, sentinel. Again, the setting of the possession is thought of as a small court, and the language utilizes that of patronage and of traditional authorization. Both Carla Bellamy for the Hussein Tekri Darga in Jaora in Madhya Pradesh and Anand Vivek Taneja for Firoz Shah Kotla in Delhi have shown how also in the Muslim context, spiritual healing's vocabulary and symbolic structure are strictly connected, if not even overlapping, with traditional forms of political decision-making. Words like darbar, darga, adalat, even the English court are used. And also Pierre Vitebsi show how there is a strict connection between possession, healing, and the political jargon and the legal one. But the vocabulary moves both ways. So when a Bopa is possessed, it is said in Godwar that bhavave, strong emotion comes, referring to the convulsions of the Bopa, indicating that the god or goddess have taken possession of him. In a quite ironic way, about a politician who did not what he was supposed to or what he promised, it is said, "Anne bav pare kare koikoni." He got the bav, so God possessed him, but then did nothing. So it looked like he had the capacity to do things, but he failed. The two fields of traditional justice on one side and of spirit possession and spiritual healing on the I hear some. Sorry, I think I have a feedback. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I had a feedback of my own voice. So the two fields are woven together both in their conceptual frameworks and in their vocabulary. And they both contribute to the conceptual framework and vocabulary within which contemporary politics is thought and spoke about. The rhetoric styles of contemporary political speech as well borrow a lot from these two fields. For example, in the dialogic style of speech of some politicians, with the speaker often making others in the audience finish in sentences, in the rhythmical pauses to let the audience approve with the usual chorus like "sei bate" or "voi hai." So it's something that usually occurs in Panchayat, this sort of dialogic rhetorical style in which continuously people approve or disapprove, mostly approve the speech of the person, and they interact continuously. And often politicians in the area use this rhetoric style for their speeches, political speech. And the more so if we consider, for example, that the Araika Bopa, Otaram Devasi, a very important Bopa in the area, has become a ministry of Rajasthan for the BHP, and the first ministry in India for the cow's welfare in 2015. So the Rajasthani Ministry for the Cow Welfare was the first to be established in India, and he was the head of that ministry. And so it's interesting because Otaram Devasi in his speeches often utilizes a style of discourse which takes some features from the one the way in which Bopas are usually talk and present discourses. So more briefly on depth, another aspect which is central to the local life, and with debt and money lending, the idiom is the same as that of patronage, is extremely similar. But the relation between money lenders and borrowers can range from one of extortion to one of even mutual help, according to the social proximity of the parties. So everyone more or less is a moneylender in rural Rajasthan. Everyone borrow money and lend money, but of course there are some figures who are professional in this and renowned for doing this. So the complexity of the fields of money lending is extremely interesting, and it's not always it does not overlap with that of patronage, for example. So it creates also relations which are not those usually which usually people realize. One has also to create new relations just to get money. So it's an interesting, because the logic is similar, but then the two fields do not overlap. The moneylender is called saukar, and according to a local folk etymology, is the saukar come from sahi, true, and karna, and so the saukar is the one who acts in a true way, offering an honest interest on loans, which is an interesting perspective on moneylenders. The saukars interviewed think they have helped villagers to flourish, lending them money for their weddings, for organizing proper funerals for the parents or relatives, to build a house. So they consider themselves as patrons to the people they lend money to. The saukars as well, at least in his traditional image, is sitting on a mattress, usually inside his shop. Often is a goldsmith, and so the classical image is the goldsmith sitting raised on a mattress and then dealing with his clients. Borrowers have instead varying attitudes toward moneylenders, from appreciation for their availability in lending money to over contempt for their greed. But the language of money lending is that of honor, ijat, of reputation, nam, badnam, if one has no good reputation, of honesty, mandari, even of the disinterested help, seva. Saukars know perfectly the record of all villagers, even of those who are not their clients, who their relatives are, what work they do, what their expenses are, if they drink, if they smoke, everything. I used to do this funny game with one of the saukars with whom I interacted for my research. In the morning, I knew someone in the bazaar, and when I went to the goldsmith, I asked him about this person, and he could really tell me everything about him, how many children, what they studied, if he took money from him, from others, and so on. So also here the capacity to memorize, to remember about people, and to really know the social context in which one lives is a very fundamental aspect of authority, of people who enjoy or can really be authoritative persons. And in fact, the saukar cultivate their record books and their memory as the most precious things that they have. Money lending is part of the general lend-den, give and take, which is what actually constitutes the social reality. It is a field in which economic reasoning goes hand in hand with moral one. So the following Marbury way of saying is a typical example of this. One with a tail, so who is not a human being, is more like an animal, so whose honor is low, like that of an animal, gets 25% of the capital. If you put a collateral, you get 50%. If you are an honest man, you will get 100%. Therefore, keep working on the main road. So follow the right path. Interest is here a function both of mere economic reasons, like the guarantee of a collateral, but also of the moral standing of the borrower, of one's reputation. Money lending is a field whose logics and vocabulary partly overlaps with those of the other two fields. And the authority of the saukar seems to come from his capacity to affect the social world by providing wealth, a very strong means and symbol of efficacy. So these three fields of human action appear as having a partly overlapping vocabulary and similar logic of authorization, and also spatialized figures of authority. A man or more man sitting on a gadi or a carpet, often raised over others, or at the center of a circle. The mixing and overlapping of words and concepts attributed in the scientific political discourse to different and separated areas of human action, the political, the legal, the religious, the economic, has often brought to describe such context as pre-political, not capable yet to carve out an autonomous political field with its own categories. Though I think that it's exactly by reasoning of patterns of authorization that we can identify what the pertinent terms and contexts are when we discuss about politics, whatever the origin and the semantic field of the words and categories we find. In this sense, the very contours of the political field should emerge through the analysis of terms and categories linked to such processes of authorization rather than the other way around. So moving toward the end, I will transfer you to a toll plaza in Madhya Pradesh, close to Ratlam, on the State Highway 31. And here, paying or not paying tolls is the central issue. Exemptions are a sort of political certificate, besides being an economic gain, and they allow to assert one's value, the connection of a person, and the potency of those exempted. Toll vale, those collecting tolls in the booth, are caught in between two networks of solidarity, that toward the company and that toward locals, who are often also the friends, relatives, patrons, co-members of local associations and samiti, and so on. So it is mostly on this toll vale that the company managing the road acts, and through them also on the local networks of solidarity, trying to produce a new kind of subject who is responsible toward what is considered a common good, the road, which will not exist without funds coming from the tolls. And a new subject which is who is accountable for the income the company must make. So must be certain that the people will pay. So you must create people who comply with payment of the toll. And mostly, as I was saying, people try hard not to pay. They also spend half an hour, 1 hour the toll plaza in order not to pay the toll. So technology is the principal means through which toll vale are parted from their social identity and provided with a new individual one. CC camera placed at every corner and inside the booths. Softwares to control toll payments are everywhere. They are checking that everything is done properly. There are atomized chains of control, so with many people checking every transaction, even from different offices and cities. So there were one office in Bhopal checking every transactions occurring in the toll plaza near Ratlam. And there are new machines for identification and registration of workers through fingerprints, which substitute the usual roll call at the beginning of every turn. And so they personalize also this aspect of those plaza life. So before there was the roll call of the person in lines, and now they just arrive and they put the fingerprints on this machine, and then they go directly to the booth. In the months I spent on the road in the toll plaza, I could see how the utilization of technology rapidly increased, and I could understand that what was trying to do it was to affect and change the overall configuration of forces around the toll plaza. In the period I was there, it failed in this aim, since exemption did not decrease, but it slowly worked toward the creation of the condition for this to eventually occur. So it's probably a long-term effect, but what is trying to do is actually to separate, to disintegrate partly these solidarity networks. What caught my attention and is relevant, I think, for the work we are doing was the presence of two contrasting moral, political, and linguistic registers. The one of local people, those trying not to pay tolls, mostly revolved around concepts of saman, respect, and relations, rista, dosti, paricit. So for them, making someone who lived in the area pay for using the road was considered as an offense, and mostly so for those higher in the local hierarchy of power and wealth. A common good, the road in this case, was understood as something that is made available for all, not something that everybody contributes to. The state as patron cannot rely on his client when it comes to redistribute wealth and goods. Otherwise, it becomes predatory and plainly unfair. And so people came to the toll plaza and they started to say, I have a friend, I know this and that, so I don't have to pay, I live nearby, I have relations with politicians in the area, so I should not pay, and so on. Another idiom mostly utilized by tolvale was that of kinship. And so tolvale, they were really, sometimes they were suffering and told me, how can one be asked to make one's father, mother, kaka, let alone their fines, from which nothing should be taken, pay the toll. So they were there, and relatives were going on, friends, and they had to collect money from them. And then the father-in-law arrived and should take the toll from him, and was really sometimes for them really difficult. And these were actually the situation made for most of the unauthorized exemptions that the road had. This really close relation between the tolvale and the people passing on the road. On the other side, there were the managers of the toll plaza, and the discourse who characterized this discourse, local discourse, as old, at odds with the logic of a modern state and of the capitalistic enterprise that they were part of, and also conflicted with the responsibility they had to reach some income thresholds and to save as much money as possible. And it was interesting that the managers used a lot transformative conceptual framework. So for them, tolvale should be transformed. They were people, uneducated people, and so were difficult to be transformed into something different, to make them understand the logic of this enterprise. But the effort on their side was mostly to transform these people, to create new person able then to deal with this situation in proper terms. But what struck me in this context was the use of two English terms by managers. One was mentality and the other was ego. Mentality was used in a meaning quite close to the English one. Managers told me that the mentality of local people was not good, karabe, since these people thought that they deserve something because of who they are. Mentality for them was a mindset that people have, and in this case, a mindset related to what the position, the role of a position should entitle him to have. But strictly related to this mentality is the category of ego, which is instead quite different from what one would expect according to the English meaning, or to the psychological meaning, more or less, that it comes from. So the first time I heard it was when a manager replied to a local man who pretended to be exempted as a matter of samman, of honor. So the man said, "Paisa ki baat nahi hai, samman ki baat hai." It's not a matter of money; it's a matter of respect. The fact that you want me to pay for the toll. And the manager replied, "Itna bada ego kahan se nikla?" From you take out this so much ego when you take out from this ego. Ego, as came out later in other occurrences and in requests for explanation, is not the individual ego of Western psychology, be it socially of course, but according to personal experiences and relations, and autonomous in its essence. Ego is a social and relational self. It is the emergence and claim at the level of discourse of the social merit of the individual. And it is probably what Anastasia defined as the hierarchical individual. I think that ego in this context is exactly a critic of that kind of hierarchical individual. Ego and local mentality goes hand in hand. They are two faces of the same coin, and both refer to a hierarchical model of social relations, which embodies a specific vision of what a common good is and what a state is supposed to be doing for its citizens. Of course, it is not supposed to make them pay toll when they can demonstrate that they have social links, then with the toll plaza, as relative and friends of the workers, as local important men and patrons connected to the local politicians, and so on and so forth. So toll plazas are places of conflict and transformation, and though one would at first be hesitant to consider them even as socially relevant sites, they can actually be considered in my opinion, a significant political arenas for the development of new forms of political subjectivities. And so I think that also this kind of places could be of interest to understand these new forms of political subjectivities. I stop here. Thank you for listening, and I hope it has been clear. And
thank you, Tommaso. Gosh, so much of that was so familiar in terms of the way that people talk about things that you have talked about. Now, we often, when anthropologists make the argument that different spheres of activity that have been separated, of human activity that have been separated in modern Euro-American imagination, aren't really separate in other parts of the world, we use the example of overlapping vocabularies. Of course, vocabularies also overlap in bits of the world where we do think of religion and politics and medicine as separable. What's interesting here is the use of the medical metaphors, I think, or the medical language, in a sense, or language of healing, right, in the political sphere. Do people talk explicitly about going to politicians for healing of some kind, for fixing? And is the language of fixing something that sort of crosses over healing and political relations?
yes, I think that's partly yes, of course. And I think the verb sudarna is the most used in both contexts. And so it's used both in the healing context, so to fix something, to make it. Also sahikarna, I think that sahikarna is another term which has this double meaning, is both as a healing practice, making something good again,
setting it right,
the right shape. Excuse me?
Setting things right. I mean, sahikarna.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But also to give back a proper the form, the original. So a tool is made sahikarna is when you make it working again, so as it's supposed to do. So it's I think that the vocabulary sometimes overlap, and it is interesting. I think exactly this. I started from this process of authorizations because it is exactly the way in which a person approaches a BOPA, a punch, or a politician, and the spatial construction and that make inevitably for a similar context, and so produce a links between the different contexts, because in all of this, the process of authorization, the fact that one can or is supposed to do something for me is reached in similar ways.
We've got John who has made comments. John, why don't you?
Well, there was a very large number of different and very interesting things going on in that. But I just, the point at which I felt there was perhaps something fairly specific to try to work out. And I think you were converging on that judgment yourself towards the end of the analysis, was when you were talking about the toll plaza, if that's the right term for it, as a site of social and political reconstruction. Really, I thought it was a very, very clever perception, and actually very, very rich potentially. But I think there's something very sort of simple structuring it over and above everything else that's going on in it. And you brought out what a vast amount else there is going on in it, which is that the responsibility to the company and the surveillance, as it were, capability of the company are both focused on a very straightforward personal cash nexus type structure, whereas the other responsibilities are, and I think necessarily, as you brought out very powerfully, I mean deeply at odds over the collective good in the sort of medium term for actually everyone, the genuine public good of having a road which is in working order, which is not a small thing to have in India for all sorts of different reasons, the responsibilities you have to particular persons in the rest of your life. Well, that sort of structural tension is fundamental to the whole process of the capitalist reconstruction of the world, with some sort of political, I suppose, palliation through the status, the political structure. And I think it's good to try and look in the, I mean, you've all got so many different things that you've seen. And it's very, I think it's important, especially sort of cumulatively, to try to pull out some of the elements of what is actually a holistic global process from this. And I think especially for thinking about what it all means politically, it's important to be doing that. Anyway, there was nothing critical in that. It was just stimulated by the way what you showed, really.
No, of course, yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, of course there is in the toll plaza. The situation is more complex also because of course there is the person cash nexus. So the company has to earn this, and the objective is that. But still, it's very complicated because this is a public-private partnership. So some part of the money should go to the Madhya Pradesh government, part remain with the company, but still, like there is, the politicians themselves are the ones who don't want to pay, and the company is does not do maintenance, and so there is a sort of how to say, the company tried to get an income more on not doing the maintenance that on the exemptions so also there is an accommodation between the different parts, which is quite complex. It's interesting to see how the capitalist logic of just we have to plan that we earn this amount and get to that amount as our task is not as linear as it could be elsewhere, but it is completely jacked by other logics as well. And also the managers, and sometimes they speak about the company as their mother, and they have to do everything for the company. In other moments they hate the company so much and they insult a lot the company. They curse their life. They want a government job, and in the list they do of the best job one can have, of course the private company is like third, just before Majduri. So it's particular. It's really a really interesting place, and of course, yeah, it's much more complex than I just sketched in this intervention. And but thank you for your suggestions.
I was just about to call on Dilip when he's disappeared, and he's just written to me to say they've got an unscheduled power outage. So who knows, even when he had a few questions, but he doesn't know even when he'll be back. In the meantime, I mean, something that you touched on has been a matter of some thought, but I don't think very much successful in the study of South Asia, which is the dissatisfaction with the dichotomy of power and authority, right? It's very difficult to get out of thinking that there must be a conceptual structure which authorizes the use of force, right? So, and yet in South Asia, the language of what we divided to power and authority has suggested that, in a sense, power or force authorizes itself. The language of Danda and Dandaniti and so on, from the Arthashastras onwards. And I think that it really is something that, what you've been talking about today really can pull in quite a lot of people's thought into a shared conversation. Because this is something very deep, and that's something that I've tried to think about repeatedly and haven't quite gotten a grip on, especially when we try to convey what we feel is going on, as it were, in Hindi and into the European languages. And in a sense, your potenza is potentially helpful. And I wonder if John can say anything about that in regarding to sort of Machiavelli and the comparison you drew on there.
Well, I don't know that I can say anything very helpful. I mean, I was more struck myself by, in the first half of what you were saying, Tommaso, by the sense that authorization is deeply performative in this context, and doesn't work unless, in fact, it is actually generating intelligible benefit. It's not. It doesn't. There isn't authorization without. I mean, there's in a sense discrediting without the provision of benefits, and I mean that's not. I mean that goes straightforwardly into the European, I mean, shape, I think, without sort of editing. I mean, Machiavelli doesn't actually say that if you're effective, that shows that you should be obeyed or should have power. It's not what he says. I mean, it's, you know, it's not relevant to what you're talking about, exactly what he does say, but he doesn't say that. It's a mistake analytically to think that that's what he says.
Yes, Machiavelli does say that potenza is something that the prince should look for. Should.
Oh, must, yeah.
Yes, yes. It's not looking
not
at
the same sort of thought.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something that make the prince like a good prince for others, but a good prince in itself, because he has to produce.
Il Principe is a book about how to keep power if you are lucky enough to have got it. It's not a book about a good way of organizing life for a collectivity.
Yeah, I first started to think
about at the beginning.
I first started to think about potenza when last year during the lockdown there was this news came out about one Indian lady who called these two boys just newborn COVID and Corona, I think, and it was an Italian comedian who made a joke about this and say, oh, this woman is really stupid, she doesn't understand the difference between good and bad, between a virus and a rock star. And so I wrote a small piece in Italian in which I say that actually that what is perceived probably in India, and it's the same logic of Sita Mata, the goddess of smallpox, is the capacity to act, the potenza. The real potenza is not just power, it's not having power, it's the capacity to enact a power on reality, which is out of control, which is something that, like it is not a moral. It's not good, neither good or bad. It's just a capacity to change the world. And in this situation, the only thing that you can try to do is to create a link with this, a relation with this potenza, and to try to create, of course, by giving the name, by naming the children with the Corona and COVID. Probably the thing is to give respect to this presence, to this potenza, and try in this way to protect oneself as well. So, and this is where I started to think about. Then, of course, the work with the Anastasia was fundamental about efficacy and so on. And but I actually think that yes, is what I notice is really this capacity to create political spaces, which I think was also proper of Italy in the past, probably more informal societies. But which now I realize that even in the associations where I work with which I work, is very difficult to make some space political, in the sense that decision can be properly made and which are binding, and we have also to follow the procedure. So we have to call an assembly, or the person must be present. While they're really to make someone sit and starting asking you questions and favors, immediately produce a political situation in the sense that it affects also the future of other people, and but in a proper way. It's not a we say complot. Now I don't remember the English word, but it's something that is recognized as a proper way of taking decision of doing things. I see a question here is about is the same highway of Ed Simpson has written about. Yes, I did research for that project, so I did the ethnographic research and had the more global research on the general.
Viva is commenting on the babies. Viva, why don't you?
Okay.
My connection is not very good. Yeah, no, that was very interesting. Actually, I sort of in between I lost track because my connection kept dropping. So, but yeah, about the babies, it's a common practice actually to give the babies names that would deflect the illness. So I work in Northeast India, and there you try not to let the spirits take away the soul of the babies by not giving the baby a very strong, good name, because that would attract the illness. So if there's an epidemic raging, you will make sure that you are giving a name which will really be very unattractive. So calling somebody COVID Corona is not going to attract COVID and Corona. But if you give someone a name like Shakti Singh or something like that, saying that, you're really strong, that might attract. So, I mean, I just yeah, I mean, yeah, I do work on health and illness also. So, yeah.
Yes, well, that would be really interesting to know, because these are the names of something powerful and attractive. Lisa, you've had your hand up for a bit. Lisa Mitchell, yes.
Yeah. So thanks so much for this really wonderful ethnography. I was also thinking about the question of the financial transactions and the kind of efforts to avoid paying a toll or to get an exception to the legal structure. But the other thing that I was thinking about is that that's not a cost-free investment, that the actors who you're describing are actually investing time in the relationships that they're cultivating in order to get away from having to pay the toll. And so, part of what I'm thinking about is the ways in which different contexts would place a different value on that time. And these are probably individuals for whom time is less valuable than the money or the savings. And I think I was trying to think about how do we theorize the role of personal ties within the Indian context, and the kind of, we all see this in our field work, that personal ties are the way that that's the way that things get done. And how do we theorize that as a part of a political theory? But in this case, there is an investment involved in those personal ties. And, I'm thinking of like many of your examples of field work, Lisa Bjorkman's illustration of actors who spend their days from the time they're young, boys, strengthening various kinds of connections as a kind of upward mobility, and that the broader your networks and the stronger you can make those connections beyond your locality, the more possibility you have for upward mobility. So I don't really have a suggestion so much as I wonder if you can think of other contexts where that kind of investment of time and energy provides opportunities for us to actually theorize that as a part of our political theory.
Question. I also was surprised by the time people is ready to waste just not to pay 11 rupees. This is the and the thing is that the ones who really like fought a lot not to pay were not the ones who daily used the road, but the ones who used them in a particular situation. So once there was this barat, this wedding procession, who spent 1 hour and a half at the toll plaza negotiating for paying like only a part of the toll, and it was fantastic because there were the relatives of the family of the bride who tried their best in order to pay less money. No, that was the opposite. No, the parents of the bride said, "No, we will pay, no problem, we will pay." But the parents of the groom said, "No, at our wedding, nobody will pay the toll." And they spent 1 hour and a half there. It was amazing. They blocked everything. They had to open new lines, and so
in the end, did they end up paying the toll in the end, or did they end up getting it?
They negotiated like the half, I think, of what, but they had to pay like 500 rupees for, I don't know how many cars. They had 40 cars, and at the end they paid only like 200, something like that. And they gave it 201 to be like for the good luck. So no, really. When I started this research, I thought, what am I going to do? It would be terrible just to go on a road, spend 4 months on a road, on a highway. But it was my favorite research until now. I enjoyed it a lot. It was extremely funny, and a lot of violence at toll plazas. Between the people driving through and the workers, between workers and managers. The manager was slapped, and then the one what was the, I think is the non-RSS, another of these local association. It was a local one, and so they came, and then they threatened the manager because he wanted to fire the boy who slapped him. So it's a continuous, every day was like a drama. But yes, I think that it's extremely interesting how people really invest in, but not just in producing relations, but in showing that once a relation. I also saw that like there were 2 persons who spent half an hour in the office of the manager trying to convince him that they knew a local politicians, and the manager made a lot of phone calls, and then managed to talk with the politician who said, "No, I don't know this man." And so also the one made a very bad figure, but it was, and I spent like hours just looking at what kind of cars people showed at the toll plaza not to pay the toll. And there was everything, and most of the people, they show cards given by friends, relatives. Are you taking the highway? Oh, I take my card. With this you won't pay. But then they went there and they started to, and so it's really a drama. The show up of how many relations you have, and the fact that you don't pay is the demonstration that you have them. You don't need to have them. This is the performative, I think, importance of this situation, that if you don't pay, then you can say, I didn't pay because I'm a man with a lot of connections and so on. So the important thing is not to pay it, because then you can use that situation to narrate yourself in another way as well.
Also, I think it's worth noting that perhaps for most of the people there, time isn't a commodity. It isn't even a thing that you worry about losing or wasting or spending. I mean, one knows that in India, you look at the watch and you stop every 2 minutes when you're in the village, and you smoke a bidi, and nobody minds that it took a day to travel a kilometer, and you get there by evening. And also, in a sense, people don't think that cultivating relationships, I mean, we look at it and we actually look at how much time it all takes. We think, gosh, imagine the opportunity costs here. Nobody thinks of cultivating relationships as a waste or time even spent, right, as any kind of quantities. But of course, what's interesting is the marriage situation, because that's when time becomes a very important commodity, because there's a particular auspicious time at which you are to have the ceremony, or otherwise the whole life will go to waste. Right, and that's when they ended up paying 201 rupees. Ram.
Thank you, Tommaso. was a great talk. There are several thoughts going through my mind, and I'm trying to focus in a couple of questions. I mean, one of the things we always joke in India is there is no yes or no, it's always maybe. That is the proper answer. You never say yes or no, you always say maybe, because there is no, everything is possible and nothing is impossible.
And nothing
it's kind of, but I'm also trying to think through what you were saying about I was wondering whether it is the main, I mean, 11 rupees is not a lot of money for these people to pay. I mean, it's not, I mean, considering the amount of money people, I mean, large number of people who have money, 11 rupees is not a lot of money. So I'm also wondering whether there are other issues of power, and the presence of toll is seen as an unnecessary intervention that they want to always challenge. So there's always a kind of, because of the built structure of toll is seen by people as a power they need to always constantly challenge, negotiate, as you do with a politician. With a politician, you're always constantly negotiating your vote. You're constantly negotiating. So I'm wondering whether it has to do more that toll also represents some sort of power that they're refusing to submit and by simply paying 11 rupees as opposed to, as opposed to some kind of asserting some kind of will, some kind of autonomy that they're willing to spend time for that, because they place more value on some kind of autonomy that they want to protect or project. And I'm also thinking of Modi's, Narendra Modi's slogan, Modi hai to mumkin hai. Because of Modi, it is possible. So the idea that power is invested in a person or in a particular person, or in this case, a tool or in some other thing. So I think the question of power becomes more important. Tool, a certain group of people versus cash. I don't know whether this makes sense, but I'm just trying to think through with you.
No, it's absolutely in this way. Like, and it's not, the thing is that poor people, they pay every day, and they are the ones who usually use the highway more, because they have to move. If you have a bike, you don't pay. If you have a tractor, you don't pay. So now there are these tractor, they attach a chart below, and so they take with the tractor 25 people, 30 people not paying toll. So if you have to go to a wedding, you go with a tractor, because so you don't pay the toll, you don't go with a bus. So it's in some cases it's just because you want to save money, because for a person who just go, there are 2 toll plaza in the highway. So if you have to go daily to Indore, you actually becomes quite an expense. But otherwise, it's just a matter of power. Is the fact that people feel that they should not pay for roads, because the state should redistribute without having me paying, and even if other pay, then I must distinguish myself. So if I'm an ego person, like the manager would say, so if I'm an individual, a hierarchical individual, I need to distinguish myself, to be distinctive. So in that case, I don't have to pay, because I have to show that I can be exempted, even though I'm not one part of the categories who are exempted. And I think that this is exactly the game, and it's incredible that when you don't want to pay, you call politicians, who are the one who should be the guarantor of the working of the toll plaza. So politicians, they are the ones who represent the state toward the constituency, and so they should be the one to say, yes, the toll plaza are there. If you don't pay the toll, you won't have the road. While they are the ones who say, okay, this man will not pay the toll. So it's a very complex game, but it's a political game.
Well, also it's probably different from, you know, paying for a bus ride, because there's an exchange there. And oftentimes people say, well, you know, there's a toll road, they built a highway, but I didn't ask for it. You know, why should I pay for something I didn't ask for? And many people think that, you know, highways, and rightly so, create more opportunities for accidents and so on, and so they're not a thing that is very desirable. I suppose it's very much like what Lisa was saying last time about the petals, where the point is to show that you can make the state dance, I think she said, right? But here that you're not at its power and you can do as you wish, and especially when it comes to moving around your land. And toll roads are often just, they run across normal routes of travel, right? And they're seen as impediment oftentimes, right? And when you're actually using them as a road rather than an impediment, you know, why should you be paying for it? So I think there's.
Yeah, I think to just build on what Anastasia said is that they've never paid toll for the road. So now for the first time they're paying toll for the road, and they see that as a money-making exercise by politicians and organizations, because they're not convinced that this is fair. Whereas, as Anastasia said earlier, they don't mind paying 2 rupees to travel in a bus, because they will never ever, you know, pay train tickets or other things, or, you know, pay a rickshaw man 2 rupees. But I think this is considered as unfair, even though I don't know that, but it's considered as not just or right way of doing things. It's considered as a scam, you know. So they're not convinced that this is seen as an imposition.
Another interesting thing which I experimented myself as an ethnographer, so I wanted to do this not to save money, but because I wanted to see how it worked. That in these 2 toll plaza, once the toll vale, they know that one person is exempted because he has fought for 1.5 hours. At the end, the manager exhausted and said, "Okay, you won't pay," or because the politician is called. Then the toll vale, they memorized the situations, and so they knew at some point that I was the working there after 1 week, 2 weeks, and when I passed by, they never made me pay if I showed my face. Only I just show my face near to the window, the car window, and they just opened the bar. And so they did this also for the people who had other reasons not to pay, but not a right exemption according to the rules. And I think that also this is very important. The toll vale, when they make someone pass without paying, is also gaining some form of respect, because they open you without even calling the manager. They just see your face and they let you go. So it's it's really a lenden, a very complex network of lenden in which everybody tries to earn in some way. But it's also a transformative place, as I was saying, because then everybody is trying to transform the model of the other and the subjectivity of the other as well.
Right. Thanks.
Kriti has had to go, and Viva is adding. I mean, you can switch your microphone on, Viva, because otherwise we're just reading.
Okay. Yeah, I remember traveling on that road long ago. I think it was in 2004 or 5 or something like that. But that time there were no toll booths. The road had been broadened. It was a death trap because people had just got those new cars which you could take to 100 miles per hour on those roads, and there were no lane dividers. There was no middle sort of dividing what is called the central divider, which divides the traffic, the to and fro traffic, and people would just ram into each other basically. So do people remember that? Because Devas Indore, Devas is an industrial area and it was developed like that in the 70s, 80s. So the road was quite all right between Devas and Indore. And then all these highway project, public-private financing, they all came up. And so I don't exactly know when the toll booths were installed. I mean, you would know, of course.
2011 or 12, I think.
Yeah.
But I think
I mean,
2011 or 12.
before that, it was a nightmare to go on those. And I wonder if people remember those days when there used to be, every day there used to be accidents actually there. Because there were no road dividers and people were speeding and they would go, it didn't matter whether you were on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, they would just ram into each other.
Yeah.
Do they remember that?
It does also.
But it's like, ordering something. Something has been ordered now and you have to pay for that particular, I don't know. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I've been told by locals that it was terrible, but still they missed the old road, mostly because people stopped a lot. It took like 4 or 5 hours from Indore to Ratlam. Now it takes 1 hour and a half. And so people stopped a lot along the way, along the road. So there were a lot of restaurants. People managed to live on and it was much more, paradoxically, the highway has made the village along the way much more provincial than they were before. Before people stopped, there were a lot of languages spoken and a lot of information coming and going. While now people just cross, and so the villages have become paradoxically much more provincial, and they're more connected ideally to the world, but actually much less mixed up in the world, because the world doesn't not come any longer to their place. But then, and there are a lot of accidents the same, because people, they drive like crazy now. They think that the road is good, but actually it is not, because it's full of hole. And then there are a lot of problems with the people crossing the road. A lot of people killed while crossing the road, because the highway just cut through the villages. They didn't just move outside the villages, pass through, and children crossing, because often the school is on one side and the village on the other, so the children have to cross the road to go to school, and so it's still very dangerous. I walked it all 100 kilometers, so I did this tracking along the highway, and it's quite dangerous.
How does it impact the political side of it? I mean, when it comes, now you can see both the benefits and at the same time the high death rate and accidents. So what do the village panchayats do about it? Do they have any say at all when it comes to this, the road?
They push to have underpass or overpass built. So only few villages was maybe panchayats better connected with the local politicians have managed to have these overpass or underpasses. But actually, there's not much you can do. But it's a strong political side in which often local actors are more interested than this in negotiating tolls rather than in negotiating the overall model of infrastructure construction and so on.
Well, in a sense, the not paying, if you're broadly speaking local, makes a sense that's very that's very obvious, which is that if, say, in Britain, highways are pretty much the way that they're structured, are an unambiguous good from the point of view of the people who use them. I mean, they're not getting in the way of anyone's life, more or less. In India, they are only a benefit to, long haul drivers or, people going long distances in their private cars, where everyone locally sees them as an inconvenience, and it's unfair and unjust to pay for it. So in a sense, I think the practice of simply not charging locals for to pass through, it makes obvious sense in terms of fairness. So
and actually, there is the law that locals in villages, I think 20 kilometers radius, do not pay, but the law is for national highways. Right. So in state highways, they are sometimes, in order, because people say, no, there is the law is law, and so it is if it is for national highway, it is also for state highway.
Yeah.
So also there, often people living in nearby villages are exempted, not by rule, but by a concession, let's say. But
that's right.
But of course, otherwise, when they started to have villagers from nearby villages pay the tax, there was like the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
They started to attack the toll plazas and the reason is exactly what you say, that there are very few benefits if I also have to pay for it.
Yes. Dilip, you had some questions, if you can still remember them.
Yes.
Before we disperse.
I do actually. It's been kind of frustrating. It was an interesting paper with a whole lot of. So my questions are also going to be all over the place to correspond with the way the paper went. So I had 3 questions. The first one was, I was just thinking that if you think about the 73rd Amendment and the creation of Panchayati Raj, there is a way in which panchayats have functioned very differently in different states depending upon political cultures. So the panchayat, the way it functions in Kerala is very different from Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra. There are the fault lines of caste, the fault lines of religion, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I mean, the larger landscape of how the panchayat functions is an interesting thing, which depends upon immediate existing political cultures as well, right? So that's one kind of general point. The second is that in your paper, I mean, there were 2 kinds of pulls. One was where when you asked people about the panchayat, some of the things that they said sounded very much like committees in Cambridge, or or whatever happens in any kind of meeting in any part of the world. Questions of memory, questions of regularity, questions of truth, questions of impartiality. The general things that one would assume that any collective body arriving at a decision has to keep. But on the other hand, there was also the things that you said where people said that a person who belongs to a panchayat is one who by rights can speak at a panchayat. So there's a kind of nice tautology there as to the question of belonging, right? Then there's another one where you spoke about where the panch sits, there is the panchayat, right? So there's a kind of circularity which also hints at a certain kind of mystification of power, which is very different from the earlier committee-like regularity of the panchayat. That the panchayat is like any other committee, whereas here this suggests that there's something that is transcends the merely profane, merely secular, and so on. And there's some kind of mystic quality which you find in literature as well. So Premchand's stories on the panchayat always speak, like the Panch Parmeshwar story speaks about how on attaining to the status of the panchayat, the person automatically acquires qualities of integrity, honesty, etc., etc., etc. So this oscillation between the mystification of power and the routinization of power is, again, I thought was very interesting in what you were talking about. And finally, I thought there were the 3 things. One is this, where you brought in the question of money, interest, exploitation. So there was the toll booth, there was a sahukar. Then there was the question of healing, right? And that healing is both metaphorical in the sense of the healing of a community within which rifts have appeared because of jealousies, manipulations, misuse of power, etc., etc. So the functioning of the panchayat lies somewhere between these 2, the aspiration to the healing and the fact that it's actually mired in forms of power and forms of money, right? So I think there's a kind of nice landscape that you laid out of the panchayat within the space of the too corruptible space of local politics and money and the aspiration to healing. So I like the paper a lot. And I mean, these are comments, these are not really questions. If you want to respond, of course, it's up to you.
No, thank you very much for your comment. I'm happy that I appreciated the paper. No, the only thing is that, yeah, of course, in every assembly, there are these ideas of memory and impartiality and so on. But the thing is that then at the end, there is not a vote in the panchayat, in the traditional panchayat. Decisions are taken according to what people say, and so people relies on what people whom they trust say. So how to you decide in a context where the consensus have to be met, whose voice to follow, and usually they don't even try to oppose two different points, but the consensus is reached to a sort of discourse that tries not to becomes conflicting. So this is the context in which these qualities are really important, or the idea that a punch, whatever he says is the right thing because he is actually Parmeshwar, no? So in this context, I think that is more important to understand how one person is authorized and is given trust in order to take decision. Thank you very much for the other comments. Anastasia, if you're talking, I think you have your mic off.
I am talking, yeah. Sorry, I've said quite a lot. Anyway, thank you very much for giving a fantastic talk. People have, I think, started to melt and give way to the summer heat. So we will disperse now. And thank you again for a paper that I think has got potential to cool a number of people inside the project I can think of into different sort of conversations, which I hope we'll be doing in future. But I certainly think that one where we start to think of an alternative and more suitable, more helpful vocabulary for thinking about what we call iterative power and authority, you know, in European languages, which doesn't quite fit India. And that's something that anthropologists just keep bumping into. And it would be really good to press our heads against that, I think, a bit further, among other things. But perhaps also, unfortunately, Piers couldn't be here today, but I think you could join forces with Piers in thinking about the healing and political languages as ones that share a lot conceptually and lexically as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all of you for your patience and
Thank you.
questions. And
fantastic. See you soon. Stay tuned.